Ethics Untangled is made by the Idea Centre at the University of Leeds. It's a podcast about the difficult ethical questions we face in everyday life. In each episode, I interview someone, usually a philosopher, who's spent time thinking through one of these questions, and we try between us to work out what's going on. Never let it be said that we don't tackle the big questions on this podcast. This week, we're discussing no less a subject than the meaning of life with Predrag Cicovacki. Predrag is a professor of philosophy at the College of the Holy Cross in the USA, where he's been teaching since 1991. He's served as a visiting professor in Germany, Russia, Luxembourg, Serbia, France and India. He's interested in problems of good and evil, violence and non-violence, philosophy of war and peace, and ethics. In 2021, in the midst of very difficult personal circumstances, not to mention a global pandemic, Predrag set to work on a book called The Meaning of Life, A Quick Immersion. It's a great book, very clear, heartfelt, personal, and full of insights. I hugely enjoyed reading it, and I enjoyed even more the opportunity to talk to Predrag about it. So Predrag, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
Okay, and we're here to talk about the not inconsiderable subject of the meaning of life. And I suppose what we're going to talk about is likely to be based to a great extent on this book that you've written about the meaning of life, A Quick Immersion. So it's a short book. It's really clear. I really enjoyed reading it. I think one of the things that I like about it is the way that it kind of balances scholarship. So there's a lot of kind of discussion of some quite kind of high level philosophical ideas in there, but it's always in the context of thinking about, you know, your own life and applying them to how we should actually live our lives. It's kind of a very practical book in a way as well, right? Yeah. So could you say a bit about kind of why you wrote it and what the process of writing it was like?
Well, the book was written in 2021. The COVID just started. It was going on for about 6 months. And I just happened to lose the best friend to a heart attack. So this was a really confusing and difficult time. It was the time when you ask those tough questions of life. It's the time when you ask the question, why are we here and why go on? And after all, we are all going to die sooner or later. There was massive confusion, massive manipulations through the media. It was the question, it was the time to think seriously about who we are, why are we here, what do we want of this life?
Yes, I think a time when a lot of people found themselves probably reflecting on some of these big questions more than they would in the ordinary way.
Definitely. And I was not shying away to use the examples of COVID in the book. I mentioned it several times. This is usually what academics don't like to do. They want to write for eternity. They don't want to mention a crisis. That's temporary. That's a mark of one age. But I felt that COVID was leaving such a significant mark on our age that it's not going to be forgotten soon and that we have to take it into account.
Yeah. I think another thing that I liked about reading this is, in a way, it's kind of, this is the sort of thing that I thought I was going to spend my time thinking about when I first got into philosophy. So for me, I started seriously thinking about philosophy at school when it was an option to do philosophy at AS level. And I thought, well, that sounds great, and sort of dived into it. But in fact, like having a career in philosophy, you don't necessarily spend that much time thinking about these really deep questions like the meaning of life. So it's great to have an opportunity to talk about those.
It's a pity that we don't, because so many of us begin in the same way as you do. So many of us are drawn to philosophy for exact same reason. And then we start learning technical terminology, the jargon that the great philosophers use, learn totally new language that separates us sometimes from our own feelings, from our own life experiences. So I was definitely trying to go back to that. I was definitely, because of the circumstances and because of, let's say, relatively long career, 40 years in philosophy, I think after 40 years, you start separating more important questions from less important questions, as if the rest of the life should be spent on things that matter. And that's what philosophy as love of wisdom is all about.
Great. So the meaning of life. So I kind of suspect that probably most people, to the extent that they think about the meaning of life at all, probably fall into either one of two camps. So it's either, I guess for a lot of people, there probably is like a single answer to this question, what's the meaning of life? I mean, I suppose you think about people who have a religious faith, right? They might think that that religious faith is what gives their life meaning. So there's a kind of, I mean, it's not a simple answer, but it's a unitary answer to that question. But people who don't have something like that, perhaps they kind of go the other way and start to think that actually there's nothing that we can say about the meaning of life beyond what's meaningful for some given individual, right? And thinking that the meaning of life is something subjective. So if you ask somebody what's the meaning of life, they might say, well, for me, it's my family or my friends or whatever, or, you know, making music or writing books or whatever it is. Is your view kind of in line with either of those kind of general camps, or is it somewhere in the middle, or is it something completely different?
Let me connect my answer to this question with what we were talking about just a minute ago, how we start philosophy with the big questions and then stray away. While I was being forced to stray away from the big questions, I spent a lot of time trying to master the philosophy of Immanuel Kant and of course, his Critique of Pure Reason. And in the Critique of Pure Reason, a difficult book that really requires years of devotion, there's a sentence that many have remembered, even though perhaps they don't dwell enough on it. The sentence goes something like this: intuitions without concepts are blind. Concepts without intuitions are empty. So what Kant was trying to say, and what he seemed to have forgotten often in his own account of knowledge, is that in life, there's not always one element that matters or that determines the whole picture, or that provides the whole answer. Sometimes something that in some ways is antagonistic could actually be also complementary. So what he was trying to say in his account is that we both need sensory experience, sensory material, and we also need concepts of rational contribution, and that they have different function, and that they function in such a way that either one of them would be insufficient, incomplete without the other, and we would have knowledge without both of them working in unison together. The reason why I'm mentioning this immediately after your question is that it seems to me that we sometimes want to force the question of the meaning of life into that usual black or white contrast. So either the meaning is there and you have to find it, or there is no meaning at all, and if you're lucky, you find it for yourself, but otherwise it's not there. It seemed to me, and that may be one of the underlying themes of the book and perhaps of my philosophical opus in general, to notice how different elements contribute something to the picture, that each of them is important and none of them is sufficient. And just because they are not sufficient, it does not matter that they are not relevant and that they don't count for much in the overall picture.
Right. Okay. So a kind of related question, I suppose, is when you're talking about the meaning of life, are you trying to describe the way meaning is built into the structure of the world or the universe itself? Or are you talking about ways in which people can find meaning or interact with the world in a meaningful way or something like that?
I think there are the elements of both there. I think there must be something that's built into the structure of the world. based on which, and by adding our own experience, sophistication, subtleties, and cultivation, we can recognize certain things and take them to be the meaning of life, or take them to lead us toward realizing what the meaning of life is. So I don't think that the world is some kind of a Lockean tabula rasa, an empty sheet of paper onto which we can write whatever we want. Nor do I think that everything in the world is already predetermined, let us say, by God or by nature, and all there is to it for us is to just go around and find what we need or what we want. So it's more that the world provides something and we provide something, and we have to find a midpoint at which these elements contribute to each other, where they work together, where they lead us towards something that we would call the meaning of life.
Great. Okay, thank you. And one of the things that you say quite early in the book is the meaning of life should only be discussed in the context of relationships with others. So I thought that was quite striking. What do you mean by that?
Well, perhaps the most famous discussion of the meaning of life, at least in the 20th century, was a short book by Albert Camus, The Myth of Sisyphus. And the context is that the Sisyphus, obviously Camus is using the ancient Greek mythological story about the man, if he was a man, there are different interpretations, who's forced to roll a huge rock to the top of the hill. And the rock would simply, by the force of gravitation, be pulled down. So Sisyphus has no friend. He has no co-worker. He seems to be the only human being in the world. It seems that the only thing that matters is him, the rock, and the hill, or the gravitational force. And that seemed to me fundamentally misleading, because we cannot be born without other people. We cannot be nurtured without other people. We cannot be called human beings without relationships with other people, whether they are friends or neighbors or children or parents and so on. So I wanted from the very beginning of the book to set the context right. It's not an imaginary, hypothetical science fiction account or realistic account of rolling a rock somewhere in some kind of a desert of reality. Yeah. It is the struggle of human life within the context of the human life to find something that will make it worth living for, worth struggling for. So that to me was a very, very important moment to clarify, to bring in. And as a matter of fact, if you don't mind perhaps reading to the audience the epigraph.
So this is from Wayne Muller, and it says, "For thousands of years we have gathered in circle around fires, around bodies, around altars, because we can't do this alone."
Yes, so you see, that's already there before the reader even opens the book, that I wanted to convey that message. We can't do it alone. Let's stop pretending that based on our abstract discussion of Sisyphus and his rock, we can come to the bottom of the meaning of life. We can't. As a matter of fact, we blind ourselves for what the meaning of life is really about.
Yes, okay. Great. Okay. And the book is structured around 4 kind of principles that you identify as being key to understanding the meaning of life. So maybe we could kind of take each of those in turn and just say a bit about kind of why you think those are relevant to thinking about the meaning of life. The first is merit. Right?
Yes.
So the idea of merit is it has to do with the idea that things that happen to us are based on what we deserve. But of course, in reality, that's very often not the case, right? So in reality, bad people very often prosper and good people don't. So what do you mean by saying that principle is important?
Well, that's how we structure our life. And we pretend that this may be the only thing that matters. You have to earn everything that you hope to get, right? If you're a student, you have to work hard to get a good grade on the examination. if you're working in a company, you have to be a good worker, efficient, successful to earn promotion, higher raise, or something like that. In the biblical or religious context, you have to earn your way toward heaven rather than to go to hell. So it starts from the very early childhood, and we seem to be constantly reminded by others and maybe by ourselves. I have to work hard. I have to be a good person. I have to be decent. I have to be honest, and so on. And then good things will happen, whether that would exactly be the meaning of life, of some kind of a reward, right? Merit is followed by reward, and our lack of responsibility or lack of effort would lead to some kind of a bad thing, bad experience, punishment of some kind. So what I was trying to do is both say how important that principle is and how insufficient it is. As you mentioned, there are plenty of experiences that we all know when goodness and kindness is not rewarded, when it could be laughed at or abused and so on. And on the other hand, we all know examples of people who do bad things and yet they never seem to be caught or punished or the principle breaks down. The principle of merit breaks down. The principle is not perfect. It's far from perfect, but I think it's one of the foundational stores or stones rather, in our overall picture of reality. I don't call these 4 principles, I call them pillars of reality. So principles is already something abstract and so on. And so this is something, and again, to go back to this little digression, that mentioned Kant, there are various elements that contribute. Merit is one of the pillars, one of the elements that contributes to the picture, but it has to work together with the other ones.
Right, good. Yeah, so I can kind of see how if you thought that merit had no role to play in life, right? If you just thought things that happen to people are just completely random and that merit is just irrelevant, then that is a kind of meaningless picture of life.
It is a meaningless picture of life. You're already kind of undermining any possibility of finding meaning in life by doing that, by dismissing that there is some order out there, that there is some structure out there, that sometimes we do get what we deserve, or so often we get what we deserve, though not always.
Yes, definitely not always. And that, I suppose that kind of brings us to the second pillar, which is luck, right? So luck seems like it's opposed to merit in many ways. We might think, actually, that in some ways it kind of seems opposed to meaning as well. So there's a way in which we might think of luck as being the antithesis of meaning. So if something happens through sheer luck, well, that's, meaning has no role there. It's just hazard. It just happens to.
Right.
There's no reason for it. There's no meaning behind it. So how is luck relevant to me?
Let me just remark that I'll pronounce it a little bit differently than you because of the American accent, right? Okay. So I'll call it luck instead of luck. But we will be talking about the same thing. Besides working hard and hoping to earn the best we can hope for, it seems that there's a great difference in life where our, so to say, starting point in life is. Some people are born into very good, wealthy, stable, loving families, and some are born in a dysfunctional family. Some are born in a country that's at that age prospering and going through a great period. Some are born in a country that's disintegrating, and that affects the personal destiny of each individual. Some are born with great gifts. Some are born average or below average. So we don't have the same starting position in life, in that race that's called life, in that series of trials and ordeals that we can call human life. It seems that some people have much better starting position than some others do. I don't think that luck is irrelevant. It can help a great deal. On the other hand, luck is not everything. Luck is just, again, one of the elements. It's better to have a nice starting position, but sometimes precisely because we don't have a good starting position, we have better motivation, we work harder, we become more creative, we become more determined to accomplish something that we see sometimes our siblings or our neighbors can accomplish almost effortlessly, from learning another language to being successful in sports to accomplishing other things that we all value in life. So and plus with the pillar of luck, there's another thing that's important to remember. And it's connected with the old kind of understanding of luck as fortune, as fortuna, as that wheel of fortune that turns up, that goes up and then goes down. Everybody's life has the moments when we are up, and everybody's life has the moments when we are down. So how do we react when we are up? Do we cheer and rejoice and think life is great and meaningful? And do we become depressed when we don't seem to have any luck? Well, with most philosophers of the first rank, so to say, and even spiritual traditions that are worth studying have come to realize is that instead of being kind of or thinking that our life is determined by our position on that wheel of fortune that's constantly moving, that somehow we have to find a way to move to the hub, to the center of it, so that better life in its external manifestation is going extremely well or not so well because there's COVID, because you lose a friend, that we know who we are, we know what we stand for, that the wheel of fortune cannot affect the fundamental things about us and also our approach to the meaning of life. So it's almost as if we have to escape that wheel of fortune and come to the place where that's not peripheral, like that wheel of fortune going up and down, but find who we truly are, what our lives are about, what do we stand for, what's worth sacrificing for, and what our ultimate commitments are.
Right. Is there also a way in which kind of appreciating the extent to which, the way our life's going or our circumstances or whatever are attributable to luck is a way of finding meaning as well, right? Because I'm thinking about kind of one way of interpreting modern society is that there's a huge amount of emphasis placed on merit, and we're kind of told that we are where we are through our own deserts, right? If you just worked harder and pulled yourself up by your bootstraps, you'd be in a better position. And actually, for a lot of people, that's just not the case, right?
It's just
so
not
kind
the
of
case.
Recognizing the role of luck is
recognizing the role that the external circumstances and the way they are unfolding that's beyond our control can also affect who we are, where we are. And like, obviously, I was not responsible for the COVID, the pandemic, but I could not live as if it doesn't exist, as it doesn't affect me and everybody else around me. Yeah. So how to kind of adjust to something that was affecting everybody's life for several years in profound ways.
And for a lot of people, by making them feel powerless, right? You suddenly felt that you had no control over your own
right. And yet not forgetting COVID or no COVID, what's really important to you, who the people that you care the most about in life are, and to retain the awareness of whether we are spending enough time with them, with the people that we love, whether we are doing enough to help them, to support them go through that crisis that was affecting us all. So luck is almost like a warning, almost like something we have to overcome without, if it's good, without disregarding it and turning it away. If you have a good luck, take it, but don't depend on who you are and what your life is about on luck alone.
Okay. So onto the third pillar then. The third pillar is gratitude. So one of the things you say about gratitude is gratitude amounts to rendering the world spiritually significant by befriending it. So what do you mean by that?
Well, let me first say that merit and luck are the pillars that kind of come to us from the outside, that the outside world plays a significant role in them. Gratitude is an internal approach. It is something that I bring with myself, or I don't. I have, or I don't. I develop and appreciate, or I don't. So it is the difference between what happens to me and how I respond to it. I cannot always certainly control what happens to me, but I can control how I respond to it. And the kind of gratitude that I thought is conducive to the meaning of life is the gratitude of acceptance and the gratitude of affirmation, the gratitude that affirms that even suffering leads to making us better. Not that I'm advocating suffering and pain. Nobody wants to suffer and feel pain. But sometimes suffering and struggle and sacrifice do help us realize what really matters and who really matters to us. So the attitude is something, I think the Stoics discuss that a lot in their philosophy, even though I'm not a Stoic and I'm not advocating a Stoic point of view. And of course, you find it in Oriental traditions, especially in India, that this is my way and my look at life as a whole. Maybe what should be emphasized in connection with gratitude is not being completely taken by the moment, trying to see a little bit bigger picture. In the book, I use the metaphor of a bridge that's slightly elevated, a bridge we have to cross, and we see the water, unruly, stormy water under us, and yet we have a certain distance from it, and we are trying to have a bigger picture and see that just because something looks horrible in one moment, it does not necessarily mean that it has to affect my entire life or my outlook on life. So gratitude, that part of the book, by the way, cost me the most effort. I think if there's kind of the most important ingredient to the meaning of life, I would say it's gratitude. So I struggled to find the right word. I kind of felt intuitively what I'm trying to say, and yet I couldn't find the adequate vocabulary. Yet I did not want to be like somebody like Heidegger and just randomly create these words that the other people have to learn their meaning because they have absolutely no understanding of what the meaning is. I wanted to find a word that's common, that's familiar to us, and maybe just twist it a little bit to kind of point out something that's of utmost significance.
Yes, yeah. So it's not quite kind of So the idea you're kind of trying to convey might be a bit more than what we would typically think of when we use the word gratitude.
Jim, let me just add one thing. Yeah. For instance, my first choice, well, there were different choices, but for instance, I wanted to avoid discussing happiness. As you as the reader notice, probably there's perhaps surprisingly little discussion of happiness, because so many of our ordinary discourse about life and the meaning of life seems to deal with happiness. I want to be happy. If I'm happy, my life is meaningful. If I'm unhappy, and I thought that the word happiness is as misused and abused as the word God, as some of these other words, and that by pursuing them, we are not doing ourselves a favor. We are just kind of getting ourselves more in a quicksand and almost making it impossible to really come to the core of what meaning of life is about by focusing on that word and trying to explore all of its nuances. So gratitude came after a lot of struggle. It may not have been the best of the choices, but I tried to kind of supported by a number of examples to make it intuitively clear what I'm talking about so that my readers could also recognize in themselves. Yes, it's good to be grateful. You cannot feel that life is meaningful if you don't have a sense of gratitude and if you're not trying to cultivate a sense of gratitude to your parents for enabling you to come to this life, to teachers, to friends, to siblings, to many people, to Mother Nature, and so on. for a beautiful sunny day, for a flower that's blossoming, for a butterfly that's passing by, for the rainbow that's somewhere out there. It's also important, perhaps, to say that gratitude is something that does not seem to be connected with utility, with practical consequences.
Right.
So much of our lives is spent in chasing what's useful, what's of practical benefits for us. And gratitude is like a flavor rather than the substance that's flavored. It's an approach. It's something that we add to it without, again, trying to be obsessed with the practicality of things, the monetary value of things, the material value of things, and so on.
So it's kind of valuing things for their own sake. I mean, I think like it makes me think about sort of the way we might interact with works of art, for example, right? So it seems like one of the great things about looking at a fantastic painting or listening to a brilliant piece of music
Exactly.
is you're just looking at that thing. You know, it's beautiful in itself.
Yes.
It's not that you're thinking about how you can use it for some other purpose.
This is also perhaps important to emphasize. It seemed to me that in our rush to gain as much as possible of the material goods, of promotions, of finishing yet another article or a book, that we miss too much in the world that's out there in the world, that we miss a smiling face of a person passing by just because the person is a neighbor if the person is a stranger and you have nothing to do with a stranger, or you're already late for work and you have to rush. And so it seems to me that gratitude is about slowing down, taking a little bit bigger picture, not allowing the practical concerns of life to determine every moment and every action, to giving us a little bit of a breathing room, a little bit of a distance. That's what that metaphor or a slightly elevated bridge was supposed to convey. It seems to me that we are not good at that we are forgetting this significant component of life. Slow down, take a bigger picture, see it for what it is rather than for whether it could be useful to you in some ways or not, whether you need it right now or not.
And one of the, I don't know whether you'd call this a metaphor, but whatever it is, one of the kind of ways you express this is talking about looking through.
Looking through.
Yeah. So what do you mean by that?
That's an expression that I learned from a German philosopher, Nikolai Hartmann, in his Aesthetics, a book that's sadly neglected, 650-page book, Aesthetics. He makes a distinction between looking at and looking through. Looking at is the normal kind of seeing. You look at something and you identify it. That Jim over there, or that's the person I've never seen in my life before. And much of our practical attitudes depend on looking at and recognizing things and identifying. I have to look at the door so that I don't try to go through the wall, right, or the window. So much of what we do, much of our cognitive activity is dealing with looking at and identifying and classifying in a proper way. Looking through, as the phrase hopefully suggests, is looking a little bit deeper. So let's say a person is passing by, complete stranger. You have no business dealing with that person. And yet it strikes you how happy the person is. You don't know why. Yeah. Or it could be the other way around. A person looks depressed. A person seems to be struggling with something. Again, it's none of your concern. You have no idea who that person is, and you notice something. Looking through, and the reason why Hartmann discusses it in his Aesthetics, is essential for our experience of art. You have to recognize the mode of the hero, of the main character in the story. You have to look at the painting or music even better. You have to recognize the mood of it. It's cheerful, it's sad, or it's sentimental, or it's romantic. And so what I was trying to do is gratitude would be like bringing that almost aesthetic look at life into our ordinary life, mixing a little bit more of that, just like when we are in a gallery, art gallery, we are struck by a painting, we slow down and don't just try to rush through the gallery, but we're puzzled by it. We are giving it time, we're giving it attention. So looking through is giving something time and attention to reveal a little bit more of itself than is practically needed and immediately of some kind of consequence for our lives.
Great. Yeah, that's really interesting stuff. Yeah, I think there's loads more we could say about that, but we need to get on to the fourth pillar. So the fourth pillar is inspiration. And in this section of the book, you discuss the idea of the hero's journey, right, which people may or may not be familiar with.
Right.
But you're kind of introducing the idea of life as having a narrative pattern. So, yeah, and you also talk about the importance of following your bliss and finding your calling and so on. So, yeah, could you just say a bit more about?
Definitely. So maybe the two oldest ideas that we have about human life is that it is a series of trials and ordeals, and that it's also a journey of some kind, that it's a journey home, journey toward our spiritual home. So we are born in a physical way. We may know what our physical home is, but we are all looking for that spiritual home. And I mean that without strict religious overtones. We all have to find a place where we feel like at home, whether it's a country or part of a country or a house that becomes a home. Not every house is a home, all right? So when I was in my teenage years, I read this book that made a very, very strong impression on me by Joseph Campbell, an American expert for mythology. A book that he wrote that's called The Hero with 1,000 Faces. The title is based on his realization that almost all the mythologies of the world, or at least those that he studied, and he studied many, basically have the same stories in them, basically follow the same pattern. And the pattern consists of 3 stages, which he called the hero journey. So the first stage is called the call, or receiving the call. So we live in our ordinary circumstances, and somehow something just hits us, so to say, somehow as if we get a call, phone call or a letter inviting us to leave the normal way of life, the normal environment, the place where we have settled, where we have grown, and to look for something a little bit bigger or something a little bit different, to look for something that's important for our own destiny, that's important for the realization of the greatest gifts that we have or the greatest love that we have, whether it's music or sports or philosophy or something like that. So Campbell thought that more or less all of us receive that call. Some people receive it more than once. In different stages in life, usually when we are young, usually around the age between, let's say, 15 and 25. And when we do, what is the call? The call is the realization that something is awaiting for us, that we have a potential for something different, that our life should be in pursuit of something else that's not part of that environment at that time. And we have 2 reactions. We can have 2 reactions to the call. We can reject it and simply stay where we are. And sometimes when we go back, we see a lot of our old high school friends still going to the same pub, still talking about the same girls, still cheering for the same teams as if nothing has happened. Or you can accept the call and begin your journey, which is the second element of the hero's journey, the adventure. You go for an adventure. You leave the place where you felt sheltered, protected, loved, cared about, and you go into the forest, you go into the woods, or you go into the belly of the whale. And interestingly, Campbell says that in almost all mythologies of the world, there's some kind of a dragon that we encounter in that journey. A dragon is a beast. It's a negative element. But what Campbell really finds fascinating, that he thinks that dragon is not something out there. The dragon is the greatest weakness that we have in ourselves, our greatest fear, our greatest obstacle, lack of certainty, lack of confidence, lack of something. And the hero journey really consists in overcoming the dragon. Because if we don't, then that fear will control the rest of our lives. That weakness will control the rest of, for instance, inability to say no to our parents. And so we continue to be obedient little boys and girls for the rest of our lives, right? Because we are not finding enough courage to confront our parents. And without that, we can never become our own. We remain children in the shadow of our parents. So symbolically speaking, we have to kill the dragon. We have to overcome that obstacle. And then Campbell thinks all mythologies talk about finding a treasure. Once we kill the dragon hides the treasure. And the treasure doesn't have to be understood in a materialistic way. It could be bliss, it could be happiness, it could be love. Oftentimes it's a fair maiden over there, right? The evil dragon is hoarding, keeping, and the fair maiden, or you are able now to kiss the maiden and wake her up from 100-year-old sleep, right? Like the Sleeping Beauty. And we get the treasure for ourselves. The treasure, again, is not material. It's just the joy, the happiness that we found enough courage, that we found enough determination to go for what's important to us, right? And interestingly enough, Campbell thinks that the most difficult part of the journey is not killing the dragon, but returning back to where we came from, coming back home with the dragon. Why is it so difficult? Because we've been to the world that other people from our childhood, from our ordinary environment have not seen. They don't know what we do. So our treasure and our experience looks alien to them. And it seems that even though we are bringing the treasure that should make other people's life easier and happier, that we are actually undermining the status quo, that we are undermining the tradition, that we are trying to bring some innovation into something, into the way in which they lived their lives as long as they've known, or as long as their predecessors lived, and so on. So the reaction of the environment is usually some people would appreciate the treasure. Most of them would be scared by that innovation, by that treasure. As a result, you have Socrates put to death, Jesus crucified, Martin Luther King Jr. assassinated, Gandhi assassinated. So people who are trying to, for instance, like Gandhi, make us aware of that the untouchables are really people just like us, that the Muslims and Hindus are really brothers, that the British and the Indians should find a way to work together rather than to fight against each other. Many people find that unwelcome. The Indians want all of India for themselves, not to share it with the British, or the Hindus want it for themselves, not to share it with the Muslims. So these people are gadflies, as Socrates said, and in most cases, they are too much of a threat for their community, and they are so often tragically killed or crucified or expelled, forced to leave the community again.
Right. Okay, that's really fascinating. I mean, I assume what you're not saying is that in order to find meaning in life, one has to be like a Gandhi or a Martin Luther King or whatever, right?
No,
So
each one of us has to be a hero in our own life. And each one of us has to find our own bliss. For me, it could be love of music, or let's say love of philosophy. I still remember how my father was shaking his head when I told him that I want to study philosophy, because he asked me the most practical question: what in the world are you going to do with it? How are you going to find any job with that, right? So I discovered that that's my bliss, and I found enough courage. So my hero journey was to find a way to pursue that, and even in such a way to earn enough to support myself and my family by doing that. So each one of us has to find that something which makes us the most alive, that something which makes us aware that if there's a sacrifice to be made for what we most deeply care about, we are ready to make that sacrifice. We are ready to rather make that sacrifice than to compromise what we care the most about, than to betray what we care the most about. So life is a struggle in which we have to kind of try to follow that inner voice, that inner calling, that inner something that seemed to be telling us what we most essentially are, what we most fundamentally are in a unique kind of a way that may not apply to other people. So we don't have to become a Gandhi or Jesus. It could be, in the eyes of the world, a very small things. But from the internal point of view, from the point of view of my bliss, of what makes me most alive, it's the most important thing in the world.
Thank you. And maybe just time for one more question, which I think is an interesting aspect of the book. So it seems that to me that there's a thread running through it of kind of a historical perspective on this. And it's at various points in the book, you kind of seem to suggest that the way society is constituted currently, maybe at least in certain parts of the world, I don't know, is perhaps not conducive to finding meaning in one of the ways that you describe in the book. So is what you're recommending kind of swimming against the tide of society as it currently stands?
It certainly looks that way, doesn't it? That we don't live in a time that's conducive toward meaning. It seems as society, as humanity, we seem to be disoriented. We seem to be trying too much to find things in our own individualistic way, to follow our own desires without concerns for others, and so on. So the cultures seem to be, the Western civilization seem to be facing a very dangerous critical point, maybe disintegrating in some of its ways. Maybe some of its values that we believed in for more than thousands of years, we now are realizing perhaps they are not as important as we used to believe in them. So this is a very trying time. But every crisis is also an opportunity. Every obstacle is an opportunity. So we again seem to have two choices: either to capitulate in the face of the obstacles and say the world is just meaningless. There is no meaning in this life. The world is just chaos. I mean, listen to the news. Look what's happening in the Middle East. Look what's happening in Ukraine. Look what's happening with the political organizations that are supposed to lead us. They are all in chaos. There's much corruption everywhere. People who are political leaders do not seem to deserve any qualification as leaders at all. So what should we do? I think the time of crisis is the time of regrouping. It's the time of re-examination, as Nietzsche perhaps said, re-evaluation of all values. And it's also an opportunity to not to continue our life in accordance with the inertia and in accordance with, well, I simply have to do this and I have no time to think about anything else. It may be a time for slowing down. It may be a time of re-examining who or what is really the most important for us. Whether it's a family, whether it's our own individual career, whether it's the personal love that we have, whether it's our country. So I have a feeling that that's my philosophy, that in our search for the meaning of life, obstacles are inevitable, but there is no finding of the meaning of life without turning the obstacles into an opportunity. That's what the hero journey is about, and that's what this book is really about.
That seems like a really good point to end the conversation. So, Predrag Cicovacki, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
It is my pleasure and honor. Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode of Ethics Untangled, please like and subscribe and recommend us to your friends. The podcast is edited by Mark Smith at Leeds Media Services, and our music is by Kate Wood. Ethics Untangled is brought to you by the Idea Centre, a specialist unit for teaching, research, training and consultancy in applied ethics at the University of Leeds. We offer master's programmes in healthcare ethics and applied and professional ethics, and PhDs available full or part-time and face-to-face or by online learning. We also offer consultancy and training services for business and the professions, including help with the difficult ethical issues faced by your organisation, commissioned research projects, and online or face-to-face CPD. If you'd like to find out more about these or any of our other activities, please visit our website at ahc.leeds.ac.uk/ethics.